Well, it's Wednesday. That means we have new developments in the Russia probe, and former federal prosecutor will join us here to talk about all of them. Plus, we are live at the federal courthouse in Brooklyn for the El Chapo trial. Security unbelievably tight, jurors scared. We've got the very latest. Also, CNN suing the White House because it pulled the press credentials of Jim Acosta. Our legal panel will weigh in on whether or not CNN has a case. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We have a packed hour ahead of us, so let's get right to it. And we begin tonight, as we do on most Wednesdays, with the Mueller probe. And let's start with this man, Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker. Of course, President Trump, he appointed him last week after he canned Jeff Sessions, in fact, showed Sessions the door the same day. It immediately flared up questions about the Mueller probe because Whitaker has been a vocal critic of it, even calling it a witch hunt. Now, Whitaker's the guy in charge of it. The Attorney General of Maryland just filed a motion challenging the appointment of Whitaker, and it's seeking an injunction. The basic issue? Whether or not Whitaker can replace Sessions, since Whitaker's prior job as Chief of Staff didn't require Senate confirmation. Of course, the AG job does require that. There's also a whole lot of questions about Whitaker's background. We already mentioned the potential conflict of interest, since he's been a vocal critic of the probe. Also, FBI probing a Florida company that's accused of scamming customers while Whitaker was a paid member of its advisory board. World Patent Marketing shut its doors last year, and customers were already bilked out of $26 million. Well, joining us to discuss Whitaker, when this thing, meaning the Mueller probe, could wrap up, and whether or not more subpoenas are coming down, as well as a host of other questions, former federal prosecutor Barrett Berger. She now director of the Center for Advancement of Public Integrity at Columbia Law School. As always, Barrett, thank you. First, let's start with Whitaker. Do you believe, as you read it, that the fact that they hopscotched over Rosenstein is unconstitutional, and that the chain of command wasn't followed here? And then we'll get into the guy's credentials.
So I'll start by saying I'm not a constitutional scholar.
And you won't play one on TV.
And I won't play one on TV. I don't think anyone would ask me to. But I've read the arguments about this. They're very compelling. I read the complaint that they filed in Maryland. It makes a lot of sense to me. But to me, the more significant question, aside from whether his appointment was legitimate, under the Constitution, if putting aside the Vacancy Reform Act, is why was he selected? And I think that's really the question that we have to be focusing on. I mean, this is, unprecedented for a president to skip over people that actually had been confirmed by the Senate to go to this guy. And it raises a lot of red flags. So whether or not a court ultimately decides that the appointment was in fact constitutional, the question remains, why this guy? And
this district court that's reviewing the case in Maryland, it's got an Obama appointee as the justice there. They're going to look at that issue. How about the question of Whitaker himself? And I ask that because there's no gray areas here. He clearly has called it a witch, and I can play all the clips, but we'll be here for 10 minutes. But also, he believes Marbury versus Madison. And every student, first of all, every person who went through a history class in high school, let alone college, remembers that decision, but certainly 1L does in con law. That's the framework of the Constitution. He believes that's the worst decision that was ever made, that there's a role for a judiciary. And more than that, he has said that if a justice is not of a Christian background, specifically Christian, that they shouldn't be able to basically have a robe on and sit on a bench. I mean, those are some wacko stuff.
Right. Those are really extreme views, and not something that we are at all used to hearing come from somebody who is our acting attorney general right now. I mean, like you said, Marbury versus Madison is one of those key central cases that every law student learns about. This sets up the fundamentals for judicial review. So there have been some bad Supreme Court cases in the past. I mean, you could look at the Korematsu decision. There's some bad ones out there. Most people would say, in no realm is Marbury versus Madison one of those that should be considered a bad decision.
And I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole, but just for a moment, think about the Founding Fathers and why they came here, right? Escape religious persecution, etc. We didn't want a king. We wanted some checks and balances. The idea of both Marbury being the worst decision and the idea that every justice has to subscribe to a particular faith, otherwise they don't have that. You can go back to some atheists there. Okay, let's move to the Mueller probe for a moment. Do you believe, and none of us know because of how tight-lipped, to his credit, Mueller and team have been. But is Mueller trying to play beat the clock for all the reasons that we talked about with Whitaker? And also today, as an update, you have Mitch McConnell refusing from a fellow Republican, retiring Senator Flake, and asked to have basically protection for Mueller, that his probe can't be shut down by anyone. He refused to even let that get to a floor vote. To that end, is Mueller trying to make sure his work is finished before Whitaker can do what many of us suspect he was put in that job to do?
I'm sure this is something that the special counsel's team has thought about. I mean, I don't know if they expected to have it be Whitaker, or if they were just expecting the actual, whoever is ultimately appointed to be Attorney General, if somebody who was opposed to the special counsel's investigation could do damage. This has to be on their radar. Do I think that they're trying to speed things up because of that? No. I mean, I think they probably have some, maybe contingency plans. They may have sealed indictments. They may have, drafts of a memo. But I don't think they are sort of skipping over steps to try to race to the end to try to beat this out. I mean, they've been doing a pretty methodical, step-by-step investigation. We honestly have no clue how far along in this investigation they are. I feel like we learn about things each week and we're like, oh my gosh, what does that mean for it? But, the bottom line is we don't know. We have no clue how far along they are. So who knows if they're, if they have things in place to protect themselves against somebody that's unfriendly to the investigation, but I don't think they're speeding up.
Let's talk about some of the players and whether or not we're reading too much into tea leaves or the significance of it. We saw Cohen make a bunch of return trips, and he's allowed to go between D.C. and New York, and he's taken the Acela down there and answered questions once again with Team Mueller. Jim Corsi, the name might be significant, a confidant of Roger Stone's, a conservative conspiracist, and also word, he believes he's going to be looking at an indictment anytime now. And then we hear, maybe most significantly, that there might be a problem with Manafort and the deal that he struck, whether he's not cooperating fully anymore, and some of the reasons people are surmising might be behind that. So take it in any order you want, but about all these moving parts as we are in what many believe the 11th hour of this probe.
Well, I'll start with the last one first, so the piece about Manafort. And again, this is just, we're hearing rumors. We have not heard anything, from any of the parties that are actually involved with, potentially his cooperation. He is not in a position to just decide he wants to stop talking to them. I mean, he pled guilty, and he pled pursuant to a cooperation agreement. So if he just decides, I'm done, I don't want to do this anymore, that agreement gets ripped up.
He doesn't get to go home and take his toys with him. But
he doesn't, but he also
what if he believes there's a pardon on the other side of this?
I mean, look, who knows? Anything's
what
possible
other rationale
these days,
could there be?
But I think that's unlikely. I mean, he's already, to get where he got, to even get that cooperation agreement in the first place, he had to tell the special counsels a lot, right? So he already had to sort of download everything that was in his brain. So it's very difficult for him to now walk that back and ask for a pardon because, the people deciding the pardon have no idea how much he actually told them already. But the important thing to remember is if he decides he doesn't want to play ball anymore, he doesn't get his plea back. That's done. So he is then facing the full extent of, his liability when it comes to sentencing with no benefit, really nothing after going through all that process. So that's the Manafort piece. The other piece that you've talked about, it seems to me that when you start talking about like Roger Stone, this obviously Mueller's team is now looking into, sort of the WikiLeaks portion of this. You see, you hear them talking about, well, we might be getting, charged with perjury. There may be, some sort of a perjury trap coming. Again, we're only hearing this from sort of their side. We're not hearing anything from the Mueller team. But it seems to me that they are, trying to close the loop on that piece of him. So, who knew what about the hacked emails? When did they know him? Was anyone communicating directly, with the campaign about this? So it seems like Mueller's team, if in fact we can believe that, they're starting to have subpoenas or indictments on that they're really trying to close the loop on that.
Later on in the program, we'll talk on the politics, but apparently there is a ton of palace intrigue going on behind the walls on Pennsylvania Avenue. But one of the reporting is the president is now going over his answers once again for the Mueller questions in writing that were laid out. What, if anything, do you read into that?
I mean, my personal view, I think, this is a formality from the special counsel's office. They probably, want to give him a chance to tell his story. Maybe they've decided they can't subpoena him, or they've made the decision not to subpoena him. But I think they're giving him his chance to do it. I do not think that they are expecting to get a lot from them. I mean, you have to remember, this is not the president answering these questions, you know, in pencil on his own. These are going to be heavily scripted. They are going to be, you know, parsed very carefully by his lawyers. So from, you know, a real useful investigative perspective, I don't think they really add that much.
But even in writing, and again, I was reminded today from some of the conversations that we saw in the Fear book by Bob Woodward, then counsel Dowd, was his two big problems, and I can't say some of the words on TV, the president is a bleeping liar, so they don't know what to believe from their own client, but also they fully acknowledge they don't know what Mueller knows. So some of the answers that they may be getting from the president that they don't know are true or not also may be walking right into a trap with what some of the questions that Mueller has posed.
Right, and look, from what the White House has told us, they are only answering sort of half of the questions here. They're not talking about any of the obstruction of justice questions, which, you know, may be the area where they think that, you know, he could really get into mud.
I know I'm way over. Real quickly, you think Mueller presents something before the end of 2018? You think in the next 6 weeks we get something?
I hope so. That would be fantastic. I think everybody's waiting for it. But as I said earlier, I do not think this is an investigation that's going to be rushed.
Barrett, thank you so much as always.
You.
All right, coming up next, the White House versus CNN. First, a political feud, now a legal fight. Our legal panel joins us after the break.